In this video I'm going to be talking about cultural appropriation. So cultural appropriation is basically one of the invented problems of the SJWs. What it is people complaining about people, often whites, using clothing, hairstyles or any other part of another culture. It can also be white people singing black songs. I've seen people complain when other races culturally appropriate as well, but most of the criticism seems to be directed at white people. It really annoys me that they can take something so innocent and harmless as using clothing from another culture, for instance, and turn it into this huge problem. It's almost as if they're trying to be offended by something. People would be much happier if they didn't try to find problems in the smallest and most insignificant things. If anything, they should see it as something positive that people are taking part of other cultures, because it's a sign of appreciation. The examples I've seen of cultural appropriations are not people trying to mock other cultures, but rather they're wearing their clothes and hairstyles like they would any other clothes or hairstyles, which shows that they're doing it out of genuine appreciation and not to mock other cultures or offend. Some people say that it's disrespectful to use a part of the different culture, and to that I say, no, what is disrespectful is calling someone racist or bigoted for using a part of someone else's culture, especially considering that a lot of these people view being racist as basically the worst thing you can be. So they are basically calling you the worst kind of person there is for something that is, in my eyes, harmless, except for the so-called harm it may cause to some people's feelings. What really bothers me is that these people are trying to limit people's freedom of expression in a way, because clothing and different styles are ways of expressing oneself. I like being creative myself and experiment with different styles, and there's nothing wrong with that. Trying to limit that is what is disrespectful. And there's no such thing as copyright when it comes to cultures. Nobody owns a culture. So black people do not exclusively have the right to wear dreadlocks or anything else that is considered a part of black culture. Every hairstyle, piece of clothing, accessory or music style is free for everyone to use as they please, and to be creative and experiment with, and to create their own new versions of. Wearing something is not the same thing as claiming that you invented it, or your culture invented it. And if there is such a thing as copyright when it comes to culture, who are you supposed to ask for permission? Is one person of that culture enough, or do you have to have some kind of poll where you ask all people of that culture? It's not very likely that you will manage to conduct such a poll. Speaking of asking for permission, if you search for what Japanese people think of foreigners wearing kimono on YouTube, you will find that they're completely fine with it and actually happy that someone is showing appreciation for their culture. I will link some videos in the description. A couple of years ago, Katy Perry was performing in a kimono, and people lost their minds about it. But the people complaining were mostly Westerners and not people in Japan. If there's any part of Japanese culture I think we should culturally appropriate, it is their relaxed attitudes towards cultural appropriation. It seems like it's a very American thing to be offended by everything. When you are in other countries, they often invite you to take part of their culture, and they're happy to share it, so they clearly aren't offended by it. There is also a point to be made of how this pushes people away from the left. When you start labeling everyone as racist and bigoted, people will eventually get tired and not want to be a part of the left, because they don't want to be labeled racist for every little thing they do. So they might just leave the left altogether. Often when people explain why they left the left, it's because they got tired of the SJWism. But it has religious and cultural meaning for some people might say. Yes, maybe it does, but that does not mean that no one else can use them. Maybe they have a different meaning for the person using it in a different context, and you cannot say that meaning is less right. Clothing and other ways of expressing yourself have different meanings for different people, and who are you to say that it can only have one meaning? As for the religious meaning part, I don't really care about it. I think all religion is nonsense. You have the right to use religious symbolism however you please. There's no deeper meaning behind religious symbols. It's just something primitive people made up when they didn't understand how the world worked. And by primitive people, I mean all people who made up religions and myths to explain what they could not understand. That includes my own people who made up Nordic mythology. So no, I'm not being racist by calling them primitive. It's interesting that you have on one hand the leftists who are obsessed with multiculturalism and the ones who want all cultures to mix and think it's racist not to want to take part in other cultures, and on the other hand the ones who think you should never take part in other cultures because that is cultural appropriation and it's racist to do so, basically cultural segregationists. So you cannot really win with the far left, because whatever you do or do not do, they will always find a way to label you a racist. Also, isn't the cultural segregationist mentality the exact same as the real racists have? Maybe you should ally with them if you want to see cultures completely separated. You seem to be working towards the exact same goal. But I can accept never using anything from another culture on one condition, and that is that no other race ever does it either. So for instance, if black people collectively promise to stop wearing clothing invented by white people, stop listening to music by white people, stop using all technology by white people, I will never take part in anything from black culture. But I'm not sure they will accept the offer. So is there ever a case in which cultural appropriation is wrong? There's a debate on YouTube between Ben Shapiro and a woman called Olufunmilayofunmi Areva. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but it's a woman, and they're talking about cultural appropriation, and she gave the example that apparently a band called the original Dixieland Jazz Band about 100 years ago claimed to have invented jazz, while they didn't. It came from black culture. So that is, I think, an example of where cultural appropriation would actually be wrong, when you're literally claiming that you invented something that you didn't invent. It doesn't really matter if it's a specific song or a piece of art, or if it's something more general like a genre. I think it's wrong to lie. You don't have the right to lie about you inventing something that you didn't invent, regardless of what it is, and regardless if it's from another culture or your own. So that is the case in which I actually think that the cultural appropriation could be wrong. And if you're going to use the term cultural appropriation and complain about it, focus on these kinds of cases that are actually real, I would say, rather than just people using parts of other cultures without claiming to have invented it, because there's a big difference. So I don't think you have an obligation to tell which culture something originally comes from, and that goes for regardless of who you are, or to tell the source of whatever cultural expression you're using. And for instance, a black person doesn't have an obligation to say, hey, I took this part of something that another black person had invented. But if you see, some misconceptions about where something comes from, I think you should educate people. There's nothing wrong with saying just, this thing actually comes from black culture originally. And I think that would be a better solution if someone, if there's are misconceptions about where something comes from, educate people, but don't try to take away their freedom to express themselves in whatever way they want to. Overall, I was glad to see a civilized conversation being had on cultural appropriation, and I ended up agreeing, though I'm not a big Ben Shapiro fan, I ended up agreeing with his conclusion in the debate. So yeah, I will link that down in the description so you can watch it if you want to. And that's really all I have to say about cultural appropriation. So I apologize for the poor quality of this video. I hopefully will be able to do better in the future. Of course, you can comment if you want to. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any videos that I make. I will be making more videos where I comment on different issues. So yeah, bye.